think some systems are being done in assessment, content delivery, and content structuring and things like that. So that's about it. And other than the one I found in the beginning, also when you say technology for education, where do you sit? I mean, do you sit in technology and look at education, or do you sit in education and look at technology? So I sit in technology and look at education to a large extent. So that also will bring in some amount of bias, one way or the other, because I mean, I don't look at things from the educationist perspective necessarily. I look at technology and see what all things we are aware of which we can bring to help education. So sometimes there are clashes in terminology and things like that comes. And the other is that particularly because we are in technology, we also realize that there are strong limitations on technology. So it's not that we can solve everything by just bringing in technology. So we need to understand where its role is and up to what level we will be able to go comfortably, because education is a sensitive domain. So we're dealing with students, the future generation. So we need to be really careful about not giving them wrong or misleading pictures. So those sort of things has to be kept in mind while as I go through. So broadly, this is what I'm going to do. So why personalize? In some sense, I think this we've already done. So most of these I have just one slide or so. And so we also realize that personalization is not a new interest. It's not. One, it's been there in other areas. We are sort of borrowing it, and even in e-learning, there has been a substantial amount of work. Then I'm actually tempted to look at personalization in a bit of a negative way, because I think we are sort of overselling it sometimes, and also losing sight of some of the important issues as we go after personalization, saying yes, personalization is the way to go. We sometimes lose track of some of the other important areas. So I'll try to link up from those angles and the issues and challenges. So we've done some work in personalization in Mumbai, so the work which was presented yesterday. Again, I won't repeat that part of it. But in the light of the build-up to that and the kind of little experiments that we did, there are some concerns, there are some viewpoints which I'll basically share here. I mean, as I said, you may or may not agree with all of that, but your feedback will be most welcome. So that's essentially what I'm going to do in the few minutes. So, well, the bottom line is learning is personal. I think everybody understands that. So when you say personalized learning, I don't think anybody has a question, why should it be personalized? So ideally, yes, it should be personalized. You want that one-to-one tutoring mode and all that. So with computers and internet becoming widely available, we feel that we can actually bring in that era of personalization or one-to-one instruction today. And the other way we are also looking at is about a few years back when we actually set up the educational group, e-learning was in a very hype stage. Everybody is going after e-learning, although everybody had their own perceptions of what e-learning meant. But today, if you look at, I think we don't really have a lot of adoption of e-learning. There's not too much of e-learning that's actually happening, except possibly in the industry sector, where there is on-demand training and that kind of things, where there is a lot of use of technology. There are not too many universities or colleges or educational programs which actually uses the E part of learning. There are a lot of distance education courses, but the E part is still very weak. So we are not really seeing the kind of success that we thought we will get with all these technologies and all these fancy things that we talked about. So at one point in time, people talked about creating high quality content by getting very senior or highly qualified people to give video lectures and say, you just give these lectures and education will change. But nothing really happened. Right? So there's obviously a lot of things that we missed in that outlook. So one of the things that so there's a lot of these negative factors that is being quoted. Lack of attention, the lack of a peer environment, and all that things are commonly cited negative factors. So maybe if you could personalize the learning, okay, so maybe it might alleviate, because at least you get the feeling that the teacher is actually talking to you straight and not to the class. So that sort of a connect might help alleviate the negativity. So this was one motivation why we started looking at personalization. Okay, so the concern of our personalization is actually quite old, there for many years. And the older ones on programmed instructions, the Bloom's idea of mastery learning, where you keep on working on till you get to a level of mastery. So the time is left flexible and expected performance requirement is made constant. So you have a kind of a flexi space learning. Careless personalized system of instructions. So these are some of the early proposals. Obviously, there are no technology component there. These are more or less frameworks. I don't know how many of you seen this little book that's available online, and also there is an associated website called Grand Challenges for Engineering. Interestingly, they actually pick up personalized instruction as one of the grand challenges. Okay, so it's there they look at it as an engineering challenge, and the section on personalized instruction actually starts off with that lines at the top. For years, researchers have debated whether phonics or whole word recognition is the best way to teach children how to read. Various experts can be found who will advocate one approach or the other. Okay, so this is a very specific example. So it says that everybody doesn't learn with the same kind of instruction. Maybe you need different approaches. And the kind of aim that this book is, or this it's just 2-3 pages on personalization. Taking is very vast. It's actually looking at neuroscience research work and how that will be usable to create appropriate learner profiles and the models. And again, for those of you who are interested, these are the other challenges that they come up with. And they're very down to earth, health informatics, nuclear scientific discovery, secure cyberspace, clean water and all that. Okay. So you can go back and look at that book if those of you want more details. Okay, so we'll look at all that we're talking about in personalization and what we did a lot of it yesterday also. I'm trying to sort of bring in a broader picture of personalization. So this is my attempt to do that. I mean, I'm not claiming that this is the way to do. So at this point, so there is a time factor. Okay, so because what I do now may not be the right thing for me to do tomorrow morning or in the evening or whatever. So at this point, to a given learner, okay, so what is that learner? I'll come back to. Pursuing a given goal, decide what to deliver. This is the space for personalization that we're looking at. So a given learner is characterized by what he is physically. Okay. So I want explicitly brought in the physical aspect also, because one of the things that we have been trying to do, and I mean, how a PhD student trying to explore this, to look at what happens to people with learning disabilities, okay, or even physical disabilities, cognitive, vision impaired, and all that. So then you also get another layer of personalization that need to come in. So if you can't assume that everybody is quote unquote normal in that sense, right? There are personal, physical characteristics which actually bring in a dimension of personalization. So there is physical, the mental framework, the cultural background, behavioral characteristics. This is what constitutes learner. At this point is important because the way I can talk to you now in a classroom of this type in here may not be more appropriate even if I do the discussion outside in the lobby. Right? So that although it's the same you and the same me, the delivery may now differs because the environment has changed. Right? It also may happen that it's a very noisy environment, so audio may not be the best way of doing. So maybe I think like yesterday or afternoon a speaker did, put a lot of text on the slide so that my accent or communication does not hamper things. Right? So maybe although audio is better, I'm using more text because I'm addressing another problem. Right? So at this point is also important, and that's something that how people are now beginning to look at. Okay, so learners are not static entities, so they change. And some level, even the type affect the previous characteristics. Right? So you are sort of again quote unquote normal today, but you might be in a very bad mood or might be mentally upset for tomorrow. Right? So current emotional states, transient constraints, like you may be on traveling. Okay, so that's a temporary state where you have a completely different learner profile, really speaking. Right? So there are a lot of time-related constraints. And then what to deliver means, what should I teach you right now? What is the concept or the topic that I want to cover? What aspect of that? So I'm going to actually break it down and say, so I will teach you a particular topic. I'm at the introduction stage, or am I giving an explanation? Am I giving an example? Am I illustrating it? So what stage of teaching that point am I? So I'm actually trying to break it down to that level. Through what media? Am I doing a classroom model? Am I giving it to you over, let's say, TV, mobile, whatever? Okay. Through what media? And through what access mechanism? So, sorry, I think I confused media. So, media is in terms of the multimedia model. So, is it like more audio, text, or video model? And access mechanism is what is the mechanism that you have to connect with me? Are you listening to me in front? Are you over a phone? Are you listening to it on a mobile offline? So, what is the media to which you are connecting to whoever is the teacher? Okay, physically present or otherwise. Okay. So, if you put all these spaces, you have a very vast view of where personalization is. Okay. And if you look at any particular piece of work, you will see that they pick up some pieces from there, bit of the learner, a bit of the current point, bit of what to deliver, and that gets addressed. Now, one of the problems that you also face is that those fragmented addressing of personalization does not scale up. Well, now when you bring in the other dimension, you actually end up compromising a lot of decisions that you already done. Okay, so it's one concern. So, as in some sense what the previous slide did, you can personalize pretty much anything, right? You can personalize the curriculum at the top level. You may not do that in the university because universities impose that thou shall learn the following things. But beyond that, as an adult learner, or you can decide what subjects you want to learn, what is the depth and breadth of subjects that you want to learn, what kind of assessment do you want to choose? Are you more of a formative assessment type, continuous, or like what everybody was saying yesterday, more of a dynamic assessment, or you want a one-time assessment, you want to return things, or you want whatever, right? So potentially that is also something that you would want to do. And the pace. Okay, so working persons, non-working persons, how much time do you have, and things like that. So match my ability and commitments to decide what is the pace that I want to learn. The learning environment can be personalized. So I can give you a different interface depending on who you are, and in terms of the layout and the kind of options that I give you on the screen. Okay. So this again depends on lots of parameters. I can also look at the language of instruction, not only whether I want to go English to Hindi. I think yesterday we had somebody talk about English instruction versus Hindi instruction. Right? So not only that, but the complexity of the language. Now this is also important because people come from different backgrounds. And if you give very fancy English sentences, although it's the same language, people may not understand. I mean, the vocabulary, the complexity of the sentences, and particularly when you look at disability students. Okay, so those who have ability to, difficulty in grasping things, for them, this is a major concern. Right, so language of instruction, it's also something that you can look at. The style of explanation, the pedagogy that I'm going to adopt in order to teach a particular concept. I don't know, so maybe there is still more. Right? So there is a whole lot of things that you can actually personalize under this umbrella. So this is one of the classifications. More of the e-learning part of this, what are the things that you can change. So you can adapt the content, format, organization, amount of things, curriculum sequencing, navigation control, so the link annotation, link hiding, assessment, support and feedback. So you can bring in intelligent help, more personalize the help mechanisms. What kind of learning activities would you recommend to a particular student? Okay, so and the kind of interface. So this is from Inan Grant. So you can see that it's pretty much similar lines that we were actually talking about. And so now if you want to do these kind of personalizations or all these elements, okay, so what environment, what language and things like that, you need some input. Okay, so there has to be associated with something about the person. Okay, so which is what I mentioned in some sense on these broad parameters. So you want to actually now list them out and say, okay, what is the input that I have based on which I can decide that I'm going to give, I'm going to do this way or that way. Okay, so whether the link should be visible or not visible, I need to make that decision based on some input. So what are the kind of inputs that you would need? So there are user characteristics like the cognitive aspects is what is it called? The vision, thinking process, more of a thinker feeler type. Cultural issues, the language that he is familiar with, his the vocabulary conventions and local cultural aspects. Transient parameters, attention, mood, and so on, and even things like accessibility. As I said, so you bring in even mobile learning as kind of as special case of personalization, right? So can we actually bring all of these under one broad umbrella? And with tablets, actually within CDAC there is also a project to try and use TVs for learning. Okay, so they enhance the TV mechanism to support some level of feedback also. Right? So you can bring in what is called T-learning. So you have M-learning, which we did a lot of discussion yesterday. Tablets like Akash is giving you another platform with or without connectivity. Okay, so there are, so all of these are also characteristics that we can actually pick up. Now the big question is we need to assess these to choose personalization. So we have to actually measure these in some way. Okay, how successful are we in measuring these in a reliable? Very often I think we are taking this for granted. That yes, we know we can measure them. Okay, and so I'll come back to the learner style issues in a couple of minutes. So if you put all that together, so this is my sort of structure of how personalization actually goes. So if you ignore the, I don't know whether everybody is looking at, yeah. So if you ignore this part for a while, we are actually looking at, let's say, a learning management system. This is a very broad umbrella term for me. Okay, so it can be Moodle, it can be your own customized thing, which actually gives you an interface, which is your point of interaction to, I mean, your logical point of interaction with the system. So what options do I have at this point in time, and what is it that I'm learning at this point, right? So there is a content control who sits in and who looks at the repository of content and decides what is appropriate to view at this point, only from the content point of view. The rest of the interface is controlled by the LMS itself. Whether you should have assessment windows open, gradebook, and whole chat, collaboration, that could be a part of the LMS. Okay. The content tells you, okay, in the LMS now give this content in this way. Right. So that's sort of, I'm separating it out as a content control box, and this is the repository. Right. I'm also introducing a notion of device management. So if I say that this is what I have to give you at this point, considering all the inputs, now the device that you have, whether it's a mobile phone or is it a tablet or is it over the web or a desktop or whatever, decides how I'm going to organize that in that device. So maybe I need to use multiple screens, maybe it's a single screen, what should I put in one screen, how do I connect up the different pieces. So this is in some sense the role of device manager here. So this is the standard pipeline. So you take content, there is some content selector, and which goes into the LMS, which has reasonably standard interface, and to the device it goes to the user. So we have pulled out a whole bunch of what I'm calling control parameters. Okay, they are not necessarily learning style. Okay, so these are parameters which are maybe something in between layer, which is used to influence the LMS. So telling him that, okay, no, this guy is not a collaboration type of person, so don't give him all that links, right? And it also tells the content control that, you know, he's more of a visual learner, so give more of visual content. Okay. So he's the guy who tells both the LMS and the content control certain kinds of information, which is related to the interface or related to the nature of content. Okay. So between them, they share whatever all the aspects of personalization that we actually need to look at. Okay. And where does this control parameters come from? It basically has to come from the user profile. Okay, but user profile is essentially something like that is user oriented. So it's not really appropriate, may not be necessarily appropriate for me to give and generate inputs related to LMS or content control. Okay, so there is a profile manager which actually does that translation. Okay, if the user has this property, what does this mean for a teacher? Okay, so the properties that is related to my delivering the content and the characteristics of you, they need not match. And they are not necessarily at the same level. Okay, so there is a kind of the manager which actually does that job of conversion. Okay, so which essentially decides the control parameters, which and then ends up into the delivery pipeline. Now where do I get this user profile from? Okay, so this. Mostly what people have been doing is to get some sort of a user model. Okay, so where again, this is, I could just ask the user, what are you? What are your characteristics? What do you like? What language are you? Okay. Some of them are possibly quite okay to ask, what is your mother tongue? What language do you like instruction and so on and so on. But some bigger issues are, what sort of learning style do you have? What kind of content do you like? Okay. Now, this is obviously hard for most users on a scale to answer. So you have questionnaires, you have a lot of mechanisms of that type. Okay. So we'll say there is a mechanism which induces the initial UL which gets stored and used to generate the control parameters. Now, the current trend is to bring in this line also and say, okay, I don't know whether this is adequately reliable, so I have to worry about that part of it. Second is that we also said that there is a time dependency. Okay, and things change with time. So I need to somehow adapt how I'm going to position depending on time and the way the feedback is. So again, if I see that a lot of people I'm showing interest, I might actually automatically orient my rest of the talk in some way. If I find that most people are yawning and not interested, then I change my topic. So there is again a delivery control that actually comes in dynamically. So this is where this question of is he doing well? Okay. So we intentionally left all the boxes relatively vague because they are all really difficult questions to answer. Okay. So we have some things that is being done for them, but there are issues with respect to all of this. So I'm going to pick up each of these threads in the next few minutes and try and see what's going on and what the issues are. So we basically want to know, okay, I'm now delivering content in some suitable way. There is an interface, there is a mechanism. If everybody is happy, I can continue the same way. Okay, only the content will change because new topics, new things will change, but otherwise everything continues. But if I find that it's not doing well, then I want to pick up what are those problem areas. I need some characteristics. So this could be, for example, learner analytics that Sli was talking about yesterday. So which tells me either that I think I've got the profile wrong. Okay, so maybe things have changed. Maybe it's close to lunchtime. You're all feeling hungry, so your emotional status now has changed. Right? So I want to adapt my presentation according to that. So this is the dynamic loop, which now becomes dynamic update of the user profile and gives you the time factor. Okay. So this, and each of this you can actually find that there is a lot of existing work. So none of these are really new in that sense. But now if you can actually bring the entire mechanism into one umbrella, it has some implications. Okay. So which is what I want to come back to later on. So every box needs attention for effective personalization. And we also need measurable yardsticks. All that we talked about are all qualitative, very generic things that, like, for example, suppose somebody likes visual content. What does that mean to me? I should put some pictures, but how many pictures, at what frequency, what kind of pictures, and do I need to put pictures for everything? So there are still a lot of questions, even if I know that you are visual, and you are not visual 100%. It's not like you don't like anything other than pictures. Right? So what is that mix that I can do are even bigger questions. So what is measurable and how and reliability, at least from the user profile side, and the relation of the personalization. So if I know that you have this characteristic, what can I do with that information? Okay, so that's actually the measurement part of it. And as we said, personalization may be subject and time dependent. We also want to know whether the personalization is effective. So again, there is a lot of work being done. A lot of people have actually done studies on this. But what do the studies actually indicate? Okay. So if you did some personalized delivery to a group of students, how do I know that it is the personalization which actually resulted in the improvement and not anything else? And that's actually a very, very difficult task to split it up. So we spend a little bit of time on learner profile. I think yesterday Kishuk made one statement saying that learner styles are a waste of time, or working on learner styles. Well, I actually stretch it and say yes, it is a waste of time, not only initially. Okay. So learner profiling, I include style in it, although I'll come back to styles per se in a bit, but it's another aspect of learner profile to me. As I said, I look at everything from the technology side and not from the education side. So I have the liberty to put everything as variables. So Whether it belongs to one class or the other doesn't really matter. Okay, so all that which can determine his learning effectiveness. So obviously prior knowledge. Now, I mean, for example, how do you actually represent prior knowledge? Okay, so I cannot say that he has done an introduction to computer architecture and therefore he can do this course. What did he actually learn in the introduction to computer architecture? What are the concepts at what level of proficiency did he learn? So even a simple question like prior knowledge is actually very complicated to represent in detail if you want to do personalization at a finer granularity. If you just say that, okay, this course is a prerequisite to this course and both of them are in the same university or college, it's okay because you have a pretty good understanding of what the dependencies are. But suppose I say that, I've done an introduction to architecture in some university somewhere, you really don't know whether your prerequisites are actually met. Right? So you actually want to break that down there. And the learner motivation, the style, so common target for most of the personalization is actually here. Okay, so I mean, at least the attention seems to be focused here, taking it for granted what the rest of it is. Okay. And as I said, we can also bring in access device, environmental, noise level and all that. And so learning profile is key to any kind of adaptation that you do. Okay, so what is the big problem with the learning style? It's a thoroughly confusing world. Okay, so there is one study which says that there are 77 not individual styles, 77 groups of styles. Some people who have come up with the style. So I can also say that I can divide the learners into 3 groups. Okay, and whatever. So and the study actually comes back and says there are about 13 of them which are very commonly used. So honeymoon Ford, which we had adopted, and Felder Silverman, which seems to get a lot more popularity, primarily because it gives you a graded style rather than binary styles in honeymoon Ford. But even graded, actually, I don't think it really solves the problem. Okay, because if you say that, okay, answer this question, do you like visual on a scale from 0 to 5? I really don't know whether it should be 4 or 3, and I don't know what difference it will make usually to the personalization system. Okay. And my 4 under the same conditions might be your 2 or 3. So how do we actually generalize this on a system level? So there are plenty of them, and there's also this which has actually listed out a whole bunch of them, including most of the things that I mentioned earlier, environmental, emotional, psychological, and so on. Okay. But then nobody is really using that entire bunch of learner style in any other personalization that I have seen so far. Okay. There's also an interesting paper on creating a unified learning style, okay, pulling out some parameters of all of them from all of these, and then try to come up with one single group of styles. Okay. But so anyway, so it's actually very rich but confusing world. So the questions are, do they make sense? So we are actually trying to personalize. Okay. Now I'm bringing in another kind of compartmentalization, saying that, okay, I have these 4 boxes. All of you please come and sit in one of these 4 boxes. So I'm actually again coming back and aggregating them and say, okay, I will tell you my content to this box versus this box, and you are immediately lost. Right. So I'm no longer really personalizing anymore. Okay. So I'm actually instead of grouping you, saying that you're from this background or that diagram, I'm dividing them in another way. Okay. So I'm only changing the problem. I'm not necessarily really creating a personalization in that sense. And everybody agrees that no learner belongs to any of the learner classes, or whosoever is the proposer, they don't belong to any of them 100%. Okay. So we are all agreeing that it is 20% here, 30% of visual, 40% of this, and so on. And it also depends on time. Today I'm more of a visual learner, but tomorrow maybe for a different subject or under different conditions, I'm more of a theory preferring learner. I want more of formulas and work. And thereafter, or maybe for example, suppose I'm traveling, I obviously don't want to do a lot of experimentation work because it's very difficult to do interactions while I'm traveling. So for a moment, I'm going to switch myself into a visual or an auditory learner for a while. Right. So these classes, to what extent do they actually fill? And also, like earlier I mentioned, you also say how you learned X. How do you characterize X? Is it a concept? Is it a chapter? Is it a course? Is it final granularity? And when do you say that he has actually learned it? Are you have to bring in what is the intended taxonomy, Bloom's taxonomy or something? Can you do it at recall level or at analysis level or synthesis level? Okay. So they do bring lots of questions. Okay, so ultimately sort of bring a sense, okay, is learner style the right way to do personalization? And secondly, how do you measure the learner style? Almost everybody does it with questionnaire. Almost everybody who has proposed a learner style also has an associated questionnaire. 50 questions, 100 questions, 150 questions, whatever. And based on these answers, maybe with a scale, without a scale, so that's sort of immaterial to me at the moment. You actually say that he is visual or kinesthetic or whatever is the learner style. Now, I mean, so when we are looking at it, so when we are doing our project and when we went to the review committee, he said, okay, now can you talk to CBSE or can you talk to a university and roll it out on a wide basis? Immediately, if I want to give a questionnaire on the web and ask thousands of students to take it, how reliable do you think the answers are going to be? I mean, so when we are in a restricted group, I can possibly do some amount of cross-check and make sure that it's reasonably comfortable. At least I can come back and tell you. But on a wider basis, I don't know whether his answers will be adequately reliable. It may be because he's not aware of. So, for example, do you like more of visual content? I really don't know. I mean, maybe I have to think of some scenarios and then try to answer something. Or do you think this is a better explanation than this? In this particular case, it is. But are you going to generalize? So, the ability to answer these questions the way you intend them is doubtful. Okay. And you may not also answer the questions honestly. It's like all the psychometric questions. You all know what is a good answer to those questions. Okay, if you answer them that way and you don't actually want to make you feel bad. Right. So these answers may not be reliable, which means your learning style inferences may be bad. And if you're going to deliver content based on that learning style, there is a cost. Okay, how bad is it going to be? Are you going to give me completely irrelevant things which makes me mad? It's like going and listening to a bad teacher. Okay, although I have the option of getting a good teacher, it's just that I didn't answer the questions the way I should be. Okay. So even if you, if you're inferring the learner style or if you're asking the user to fill in, it may have implications. Okay, one of the elements I'll come back to in a minute. So, for example, there is a group which believes that it's better to recommend personalization rather than mandate it. So I don't remove anything. Is there, but I'll just sort them. I mean, I'll give you the most likely ones at the top. So if you think it's not making sense, you can come down and look at alternate styles. Okay. Now there are again two views of schools of thought on this, that it's good for one and not good for another. Okay. And also the static and dynamic issue which I touched upon earlier. So, why create another aggregate when personalizing? So if your learning style is actually based on some parameters that you are actually measuring based on the questionnaire or based on behavior, why not use the parameters directly for personalization? Okay, so kind of like those Google, if you use your Gmail, etc. Every time they will come up with some feature, and then leave it open for you to install it if you like, and uninstall it when you don't like. And you will find that after a period of time, things which are not adequately popular, the feature just disappears. I mean, they just disable it forever. Okay. Things which gets used has a wider adoption, they clean it up, make it better and get it flowing. Okay. So I can actually look at personalization at that level. I look at the individual features and not aggregate them into any particular category. So the Google Lab model could be something that we can try. So you actually get direct feedback. So my failure in getting the content rightly to you may not be because I got the learning style wrong, but maybe because of my questions were giving encouraging you to give a wrong answer. Right? So by directly attaching it to the features, I don't have that interaction. So I'm not making an intermediate inference. So I can directly map where what kind of learners actually have that negative feedback or a positive feedback. And there's also a lot of indirect feedback that is based on the performance measurement, which I'll come back to in a minute. Okay. So, and from that point of view, you can actually look at personalization as a machine learning problem. Okay. So there are a whole bunch of these features which are at the base level for the learners. Okay. And on the other side, every content or content piece has a set of features. So your task is to find the right kind of mixing mechanism. So you can actually look at it as a very broader ML. But ML is also very dangerous. Again, few years back, people talked about knowledge discovery. Just give it all the database of everything that you know, and the system will come up with a superhuman, intelligence, because it will derive all the knowledge that is ever known from that database. It didn't work because the space was too vast, too big to make any sense out of that. So today people are looking at even data mining on a guided mode. So you indicate saying that, okay, this is the kind of relation that I'm looking for. This is the kind of fields which may be relevant to focus on. This is the nature of that relationship. So you give some indication as to what kind of mappings are meaningful. People need to do that. If you leave it as an ML problem, you actually end up another disaster. Right? So you need to be a guided ML where learning style could be a way of giving that guidance. So I'm not mandating it, but I'm giving some indication that this is the nature of links that you might want to try. So again, there are a few people who from machine learning, but again, it's more of the style to content feature matching than feature to feature. So maybe opening up might actually help us to get that. So device manager part, I think I mentioned earlier. So a variety of devices are available. Now, a device has you can actually characterize them in terms of properties like this: amount of screen space, the degree of manipulatability. Mobile, you can't do too much of touch manipulation because the buttons are too close. For a student, it can actually be a very irritating experience. Right? So, and on a mobile, you don't have too many other control mechanisms possible. So you may actually want to reduce the interactivity and so on. Okay. The nature of input devices and so on. Okay. So the mode of screen space, whether it's touch or non-touch, and the other controls available and all that thing. So you can essentially characterize the delivery devices based on some features again. Okay. So this could be added to the pool of features that you want to do this. So can we hide all this complexity in the device managers? Can we abstract them so that the device manager can figure out which is the device I am talking to and deliver content, and everything else in my architecture need not really be concerned about the device. So this is the mobile learning specialization we could bring. But this has implication because I need to make sure my content is rich enough to bring in that adaptivity at this point. The interface personalization, so this again I mentioned earlier, the content delivered by content control. So I'm not talking about the content personalization at this point. That is my next topic. Mandate or recommend. Recommend enables overriding and therefore feedback on effectiveness. So if I give a bunch of things, give the most likely one on the top. If people are actually going to the lower one, that's an indication to me, okay, there is something wrong with my user profile or my content control. So I can actually get feedback. But if I don't give them the link, then you don't get that feedback of effectiveness. So if you keep option on the options are open, then you encourage exploration. But you might actually create more confusion because there are too many options on the screen, and for some learners it may be a confusion, and for the high-end learners it might give them more options to explore. So these are some of the things that you can do in terms of at the interface level. So let's come back to content personalization. So again, here the scope is quite big. So I can actually go to the words and sentences level. Okay, so I said for disabled students, etc. That they might be very important to do that. So and to the level of a course or a book. So I'll say, okay, you are this kind of learner, use this textbook. You are this sort of learner, use the other textbook. Right? So I can do at that very high granularity or to the extreme low level of personalizing words and sentences. Both of these are obviously bad. Okay, so you can't afford to have different, 25, 30 different books for the same subject for different learner profiles. And this is bad because technologically it's too early for this. I mean, we really don't have the kind of technology today to do personalization at this level. So we're looking at something in between. So we need to organize the content at the right granularity with the right kind of information. So, and the other concern when you're looking at personalization is we also are losing track of reusability. Okay, so we have been, last 5-6 years, e-learning has been all about reusability. So lots of frameworks, lots of mechanisms have come. But now personalization is almost completely sidestepping it and say, okay, let's make very, very tight and rigid content, which actually may not be reusable. So how do I make these, whatever is the content that is created, portable across different learning environments, and who will create this content? Okay, so we're going to create a very complicated framework. Teachers are not going to create that kind of content. So you have an additional load. On the other side, if you can make it too simple, then you can actually get teachers to create or adapt to the content that is there. So what is the granularity that we should choose, and where does that pieces actually fit into the overall scheme of things? So we actually did a little bit of experiment when we were working on that Anido project. We actually took some textbook chapter, and 4 or 5 people actually looked at every sentence and tried to identify what is the role of that particular sentence in that chapter. Okay, so obviously some of them are kind of non-pedagogic. You just want to draw attention, you want to connect it up to something, you might actually do a little bit of humor or whatever. Okay, so you might actually start off your text saying, have you seen this movie? But the content actually has nothing to do with the movie. It just sets the context, right? So, or how many of you have eaten a particular food? Let's define exercise now. Just define that. So this is a direct content with no annotation saying it is content. Okay, so this is what I'm going to teach. So there is an annotation. So I know that what follows is the key part that I need to focus on. And this is kind of setting the stage. Right. So you can actually look at the, not necessarily at a sentence level, but small groups of sentences and tag them into the role they play in the delivery. I mean, whether it is in a lecture or in a textbook. So, and this provides a useful way for me to organize the content. So actually I look at that pieces actually fit into the overall scheme of things. So we actually did a little bit of experiment when we were working on that Anido project. We actually took some textbook chapter, and 4 or 5 people actually looked at every sentence and tried to identify what is the role of that particular sentence in that chapter. Okay, so obviously some of them are kind of non-pedagogic. You just want to draw attention, you want to connect it up to something, you might actually do a little bit of humor or whatever. Okay, so you might actually start off your text saying, have you seen this movie? But the content actually has nothing to do with the movie. It just sets the context, right? So, or how many of you have eaten a particular food? Let's define exercise now. Just define that. So this is a direct content with no annotation saying it is content. Okay, so this is what I'm going to teach. So there is an annotation. So I know that what follows is the key part that I need to focus on. And this is kind of setting the stage. Right. So you can actually look at the, not necessarily at a sentence level, but small groups of sentences and tag them into the role they play in the delivery. I mean, whether it is in a lecture or in a textbook. So, and this provides a useful way for me to organize the content. So actually I look at the text, pick up those pieces. Now I can say, okay, if I were to move that group of sentences to a later point, will it affect anything badly? Will it help some students and deter for some students? For example, can I keep the example first or example last? First examples in that sense are movable with that unit. Right. So some of these I can do in terms of where I can reorganize them. So we need to also make sure that the content is actually well tagged. So this media tagging is not really a problem because this technology actually gives you most of these. Target audience is actually again little tricky. So for example, can you say that this is good for 7 to 10-year-old students? What does that actually mean? It's not that when he becomes 7-year-old, suddenly he becomes, this is useful to them and otherwise it's not. We are again hiding a characteristic by looking at using age as a intermediate layer. Yeah. So the reusability issue, which is what I mentioned earlier. So often personalization results in creation of different textbooks. Maybe they are online, offline, hidden or otherwise, but they are almost from start to end to follow one track if you are a particular type of learner and another track if you are a different type of learner. Okay. So if I do this, and if there are strong dependencies between along the way, then it's actually not a sustainable effort. Because then tomorrow when I want to make another specialization, I need to create another branch. Okay. When technology changes, I have to update all the different components simultaneously. The number of variants I can create are immediately restricted. So this generally seems to be what many people are actually doing. I mean, possibly implicitly, but you get kind of a different textbook for different profiles. So you need a content mechanism which actually encourages significant amount of reusability and ease of modification by the teachers. So we actually, when we did our work, I mean, I'm not saying that this is the way to do it or whatever, but we find that this is something that's useful, is to structure that. Eventually, when I, let's say there is a goal, like learn properties of light, okay? And a sub-goal could be learn about reflection. So, when I'm teaching reflection on that particular concept, let's say, okay, I can actually break up that lecture itself into final grains. Okay? So there is something which actually I give some example, some general scenarios where reflections occur, like have you looked into a mirror recently? I mean, what do you see? Or have you seen, have you looked at the spectacle glasses and how they differ in terms of what you see and all that. So I might do some kind of general introduction. There is a definition of what is reflection. I might give examples. I might actually demonstrate, and I might give a more explanation. So these are things that I can break that one lecture or one session into these pieces. Right. We actually try to structure this, saying, okay, this goal is of type, maybe fact, procedure, process, the Merrill's kind of classification. And look at that. Based on that, we prepare a template. Okay. And saying that, okay, for concepts, this is the kind of template that could be used. Okay. And of course, you can have multiple templates and you can choose from there also. But let's say we would use the one kind of template. And now the thing is that this definition is now essentially extractable. And similarly, the example is also extractable, demo, or to some extent even explanation. Okay. Now, normally in a textbook, you will actually find that there is a continuity link where there is a co-reference. We just talked about this. As you have seen earlier, this, or we will talk about it later. So, which actually gives you a dependency. But most of these dependencies are curable. You can actually change the text suitably to remove most of these dependencies. So, this is what we're trying to do. So, you can actually create your content repository at this level of granularity. Okay. So now there are 2-3 advantages of doing this. One, this is something that will make sense to all teachers. I mean, this is a terminology that they will be comfortable with. So if I say that, okay, can you give me one more introduction for a different kind of audience? It's possible to create that. Right. So now you can have a bunch of introductions, a bunch of definitions, bunch of examples, bunch of demos, bunch of explanations, and allow choice of that based on whatever properties that you want to. Okay. So my content properties are now attached to this level, and instead of at a higher granularity. So selection of pieces for the slots, specialize the template suitably, and reorder the slots. So I can also say that because this is a guy who doesn't want too much of introduction. He actually wants to start with the definition, right? Or he may not need an explanation. He is more comfortable with this much material. So some parts I may drop, some parts I may reorder them depending on the learner profile. So I have a fairly high degree of flexibility in terms of the personalization that I can do. Of course, there are issues of continuity, language, and so on. And another aspect is also, it may not be just procedure type that defines the template. I also want to know what is the level of learning expected. Is it a recall level that I want? Is it an synthesis level or analysis level? And according to that, I might have a different template. So I might also bring in further characterization in the template based on the level of learning also. But by looking at a lot of the existing work and what we've been trying to do and our own little experiences, this seems like a good way to build the structure, keeping in mind all the points I mentioned earlier about reusability, structure, teacher familiarity, and all that. So we need a content repository to support all of this. So again, if you look at most of the literature, this organizational content is something that's not given as much attention. Most of the attention focus on learning style and how they match, and not the way these things are structured. Okay. So how do I manage this repository? What kind of annotations? What's the granularity, dependencies, and interrelationships? And as I said, you cannot tag content using learner characteristics. You should have content characteristics and then get a broker to actually do the matching of this. So we need a matchmaker, which is the content control box I had in my. So some of the annotations can come out of based on what do you want the learner to be in order to use this content? What should he be wanting? What should he know? And things like that. Okay, so these are things of one type. Then properties like the level to which this content is aimed. Is it at school level or a college level? The kind of accent that uses, if there is an audio, what is the taste that is assumed in the content, format, etc. So these are things, again, the creator has to pick up and annotate manually. Some of it you can actually automatically extract the size to decide whether it's suitable for a mobile device or not, the duration, format, and some amount of text analysis can give you some keywords and things like that. So these could be done through an automatic mechanism, and other aspects like cultural backgrounds, etc., which need to be annotated. So we actually try to create kind of a markup language, which we thought we might actually do this. We call it pedagogy-oriented content markup language. So the idea was to talk content exactly in the way that I mentioned there. So concept, misreflection, in media, text, the level is medium, and this is the text associated with it. There's a definition, there's an example. So it's almost HTML, XML format, but all the tags are things that make sense to a teacher. Okay, so there is not too much of learning to do, but even there we still have a problem. I mean, sometimes the difference between introduction and example is not all that clear. Okay, an example can actually serve as an introduction. Okay, so sometimes we have long arguments in the team as to what fits there. So getting more crystal definitions of these are possible. And with a little more trials, we may actually be able to do that. And all the content that we have done for the Annual system is actually done through this framework. We actually broken up and structured. So we have a full language framework for this. We're not saying that this is the end or this meets all the requirements. It meets most of the. But annotations are pedagogy oriented, so therefore reduces the teacher load. Matches with the requirements of content control, so you can actually decide the role. So if you know that this is an example and the student is in a hurry, you can actually drop them because we know that's an example. So for example, when you are in a revision mode, you can just pick up the important parts, the definitions and things like that, and throw away a lot of things. So the role, relevance and importance is definable based on these annotations. Dependencies can be indicated. You can say need that to follow this, and XML based thing. So it's portable. So you can actually build a DTD and so on. So the matching component is the learner properties to content properties, and this also happens at two levels. Some matches are mandatory matches. If it doesn't match, the content is just not suitable. So we have a filter like level, accessibility. If you are a blind person and you have a text content, it just doesn't apply. So there's no point in doing that. But learner style, etc., is more of ranking. So we don't want to drop. But if I have a more appropriate content, I would like to give you that. If not, even and not so appropriate content can be brought in. So the matching is at a filter and a ranking level. Okay, so the next big issue, and after that I'm going to wind up, is effectiveness. And again, lots of studies are there, but most of the studies are 20 students, 30 students classes. Okay, so that's really not a good enough indicator of effectiveness of personalization. I mean, your course may be good, but I don't know, is it because you are a good lecturer? Is it because the pictures that you used were very nice? Or is it because it was a personalized delivery? Okay. And discriminating against these or conflicting hypotheses to fix on this is much harder and not very visible from most of the studies. And the improvement that you expect out of personalization could be because the learner learns deeper, okay, and maybe he takes less time to learn, or your motivation level is higher because you have less distraction, you feel more comfortable following, so you want to learn more. Okay. And all of these are welcome and they are not measurable with the same scale. So most of these have to be measured indirectly or statistically, and so that's where a lot of the studies actually don't give us much input. And most of them actually look at exam score. I mean, that's actually the big question. Does the exam score actually reflect what you really want out of personalization? Okay, so you can actually get a much better exam score where just going and mucking up answers from the guidebook than doing deep learning. And very often, if you actually learn deep, you will actually get lower score in the exam because you end up thinking too much, which is not what the teacher wants you to do. So you actually have sometimes that kind of problem. So you can look at learning analytics, which Shelly was talking about yesterday. Implicit parameters, time spent online on different aspects, active participation, forums, even eye movement tracking, facial expressions. So these are parameters which I can use to collect implicit information as to whether my personalization is actually being effective. Is he looking at what I really want him to look at, or is he looking at elsewhere? Okay, so there are a lot of these kind of things. And very little of that currently happens in most of the personalization work. Okay, and also the appropriate control group. So if I do a personalized delivery, what is my control group? I mean, what is it that they're going to go through? And that's also harder, because if I give all the content of all types to the control group, just too much of load. So it's no longer a control group. Okay. But if I give only selected part, let's say I give the textbook and I don't give my lecture, maybe the performance is because I'm a very good lecturer. Okay, so which if everybody listened to my lecture, maybe they would have also got the same mark. So making that discrimination seems very hard, and most of the studies don't seem to bring out those kind of issues. But is it worth doing? I mean, is personalization worth doing? I think according to everybody, it is yes. If you look at all the e-learning roadmaps from any country, personalization is an agenda, and as I showed you, grand challenges also brings it as an agenda. So logically, yes. I mean, it does make a lot of sense, because that's the way computer-based education need to go. But are we doing it the right way? I doubt. So is it feasible to do? I mean, if you want to do a real personalization, maybe another 10 years, because you want to look at language technology, AI, machine learning, all of that has to come together to solve that problem. Okay. I mean, 10 years is my guess, so I'm answerable on that. You know, work exists in learner model activity organization, but very often we need to, the challenge is then actually piece pieces together to create that overall framework, which is the kind of structure that I tried to do in the beginning. We have a generalizable framework. In most cases we don't. The work is mostly focused on one aspect or the other. It may be subject and level dependent. And availability of data. So as I said, questionnaires may not be reliable, because you may not really get proper answers. But if you want to infer the learner style or whatever from data, you're generally not going to get enough data from any class. Because you have, let's say, 50 or 100 students, one semester class, is going to be so little data for you to make any inference about anybody's learning style, that's actually another challenge. So you really need to look at very large rollouts. You know, if you have 10,000 students going through a class for one semester, maybe you are actually talking about a lot more data. So formally convincing evaluations is hard, some attempts, but mostly are incremental or partial evidence, because the groups are small. Okay, I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip these. So the ANUP system, which we presented earlier, and more of the, I mean, you can actually see the paper for it. So we actually followed pretty much this model of what to teach, instruction template, and choice of material for each fragments. And this is something that I have not seen many people following this level of adaptation. So I also tried to do some work with, because given that content creation is difficult from scratch, can you use a lot of open education resources and use them as alternatives? I mean, it's not the best solution, but then it's a very cheap solution, because they're all available. We actually tried to create a course on introduction to open source using only existing material, not necessarily coherent. So we created the course structure, the modules and how much time and what is to be covered and all that. Then we try and pick up individual pieces from the net, which are recognized open education resources. Okay. So the advantage was that you can now choose those resources based on learner profile. You can actually tag them with, saying this nature of content, or this is intended for this audience. And even the users can rate resources. So I can build an adaptive course at almost zero cost for me, because I'm using existing material and playing around with them and giving the control to the student. So potentially my course might actually evolve over time without any intervention from me. Okay. I mean, little wishful thinking, but it seems feasible to try. So we built our initial system, but some of these things we are actually continuing to do. And other interest we are now looking at is learning disabilities. So again, the problem here, the challenge here is my content structure and organization need to be sufficiently rich and at an appropriate level of granularity for me to do all these personalization, from device to the learner style to disabilities. So that's actually the bigger challenge. So how should I store my content in a way that these things are made feasible? Okay. So I'll stop here. So personalized learning obviously is a promising area. There are lots of interesting questions, lots of angles to look at. So I feel that personalization by matching features to learner properties rather than using some kind of classification is possibly a more workable solution in the longer run. Use of dynamic information gathering to evolve learner profiles so that you are no longer on a static mode. At least over a period of time, you might be able to build in a lot of meaningful profiles. Okay. And there's a lot of AI related work that actually fits in there. Sufficiently rich and effective and scalable content organization and authoring mechanisms. I mean, that's really the challenge. We really don't have enough content of the type that you want in order to play around with personalization. Okay, so thank you for that. That's what I wanted to share with you.